Hello everybody and welcome back to class 5 of sil201 Intermediate Silhouette Effects. And today we are going to be looking at hands. Now the overall task that we've been given is to replace this front of the cake mix here with some different packaging for an international market. And I've already gone ahead and rotoed out the front here because the interesting bit actually for us, let's take us over here, turn our overlays off. So the interesting bit for us here is actually the fingers rather than the package itself, rather than the front of the package itself here. Because once we're at the compositing stage and we've replaced the front here, we haven't replaced the fingers, we want to keep the original fingers in. So this is a very nice excuse for me to look at hands. Because rotoing hands can be a huge job. The hand itself is a rather complex object when seen in roto terms. There's lots and lots of different joints to it. So we look at the hand here itself, we've got the main hand, we've got the thumb, we've got each individual finger has the this knuckle joint here, then the first joint, the second joint, and the third joint. And all of the fingers move independently. They twist around, they change perspective. It's it's a really quite a big sort of challenge that we have to face. So it's not surprising that a lot of people treat hand roto with some sort of trepidation when they first come to it. So what I want to do and look at in this class is to kind of get an overall idea for some hand roto, and then start to look at specifics in relation to the job we have in front of us. And as always, we're going to just take a quick look at the shot and start to break it down before we even draw our first shape. So looking at the shot here, we can see we've got a nice camera move, moving up following the package. And we also have movement within the arm and the hands itself, which we have to try to follow. So we've got a couple of different ways of trying to handle this. One of them would be to try to stabilize out the hand here or the arm and see if we can remove all of that movement there and just stabilize everything up with the hand. The other one is to try and see if we can just stabilize around the camera again. As we've seen before, removing as much motion as we can automatically using trackers is going to make our life so much easier. And when we've got so much other stuff to handle when it comes to hands, that's going to be an absolute necessity. So looking at this one here, I don't really think the chance of getting a good track on the arm is much of a possibility, but let's give it a go. So let's turn the overlays on, create a new layer, call this one arm track there, get into the tracker. And if we look at it, the arm is not, the hands themselves are going to be very tricky to stabilize out and get decent motion on it. I don't think that's going to be really all that much use in an overall kind of aspect, because if we take any part of the finger here, the fingers are all moving so differently that it's only going to be valid for that one particular finger. So if we move backwards a little bit, we've got the little joint here at the wrist, which may be a possibility. So let's take that, see what we can find. There's not a huge amount of detail that we can see. I think the blue channel is probably our best bet at the moment. Contrast that up, denoise that out. And we don't have to track that all the way back because the hands go well out at that point. So let's track it forwards again. Okay, and let's then apply that. And check out, go back to transform and check out the stabilization that has given us there. So we just see whether that's helped us or not. And that's certainly isolated out a lot of the movement, so we can concentrate on hand a lot more. Of course, that's actually not a bad idea. The other way of doing it, let's just delete that tracker there and create another one. We'll call this arm track 2. And let's track this up. The other way of doing it, of course, is just to look for somewhere where we can take out the camera movement, and that is going to be somewhere on the same plane. Let's turn these stabilize off for a second. Yeah, something with the same relative distance, and that's going to be this box here, definitely. And this is going to be a really, really straightforward track, I would hope. So let's find somewhere where it's completely sharp. There we go. And all of this here offers some fantastic tracking details. Change that to start frame. Actually, that's all fine. Let's track that backwards a couple. Yep. And obviously that's given us no real trouble there. I think we might just smooth that out a tiny bit. Just take any tiny little bits of noise, but that should be absolutely fine. Let's apply that now to tracker 2. And let's see, come back into transform, stabilize that up, see how we get with that. So we can see that's steady as a rock, but we now have to take into account the movement of the arm and the hands as well. So, you know, whichever one you feel is going to be most useful for you. I think both of these are perfectly valid ways of working here. And I think in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stick with the camera stabilized out one. So what do we have to do now? Well, let's find out where we really need to start our rotor, because obviously we don't need to start it all the way back here. We're going to come in, we'll start it around about here, I think. Okay. So let's break this up into the individual components before we start moving too much further. So zoom in a little bit and just show you a couple of little things. I'm going to actually rotor out more of the hand than I need to just to begin with, just so you get a better idea of one of my approaches to working with hands. So let's come in with our X-spline tool here and let's start to look at the main edge of this hand here. So we can see that as the hand grips down on the bottom here, this edge is going to start to change shape. So we need to be aware of that. So we'll look for the most complex area there, which is probably going to be this bit here. And let's just take it a little bit way back from the wrist and start creating our points. So I've gone a little bit deeper here, and now I can come around to the fingers here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a couple of little points at the edges of the fingers here. So I'm going to come along, even though these are going to be covered by other shapes, I'm going to add edges going along there, and we'll see why in just a little bit. So let's come around here, boom, close that up, and just make this nice. There's a bit of softness here because we've already got a bit of motion blur going on, so we'll compensate for that later. Let's turn this into a slightly easier to see shape there. So we actually do have a relatively complex shape for our main sort of wrist and back of the hand area here. And as we move over a little bit here, let's animate that up. And we're going to do point-to-point matching, so match the wrist area up as much as possible. And And one of the things we have to be a bit more prepared to do in this case is to use the reshape a little bit more. So we're working on finer level of detail. So we're either working on our sub-object area here, or we can even be working on individual control points. I'm going to obviously try to avoid that wherever possible, but that's sometimes going to be a necessity. So let's take our bottom area here, bottom edge here, tap T twice to bring us into the sub-object controls, hit W to then rotate that around. And I might have to come in here and let's see how that edge is moving. So I'm matching point for point along here. So you can see this point here, or this edge here, and this edge along here is fine when compared to this one down here. But I don't have the sufficient control points enough to take on this area here. So I am actually going to have to add a control point there. Come back and check out that that's fine, and it is. Let's take the top edge now. So select all those, hit T to come into my transform, T again to come into the sub-object, so just transforming these last objects that I selected, and just rotate those around. Let's just check out if those are matching the right areas. So here's why I created these control points at the knuckles here, so I can much more easily figure out the point-to-point movement when it comes to this area here. So I know that these are meant to be going along there. And I can figure out that I should have these two stretching over the ring finger knuckle. So this one and this one should be stretching over here, and this one and this one should be coming over the this one and this one should be coming over the, so these two should be coming over the ring finger, these should be coming over the middle finger. Cool, so we should be doing point-to-point matching now. So if we look through now, we can see the shape is moving pretty much how we want it to, but the timing is completely off. And this is something we'll be taking a look at in much more detail in a later class, about the pacing of how people move. Because at the moment we look at our keyframes down here, we've actually got two linear keyframes. So the movement is just moving in a very, very linear fashion from point A to point B. Now the movement in the arm, it's slowing down and speeding up at different times. So we can change this and change the interpolation here to ease in, ease out, or let's take that to ease out. Let's change this one to ease in. And change this one to ease out. We'll see if that makes any difference at all. And we're still playing catch up a little bit. So there's some, set that to linear there. There are actually some occasions and some movements which respond really well to changing the interpolation here. But the general rule of thumb, so we stick with linear and we add extra keyframes to try and sort of compensate for that movement. Now, if we do have a movement like this one here, I'm actually not against coming in just trying to change the interpolation to maybe ease in, just to see if that works. And if it works the first time, fantastic. If it doesn't work, straight away turn that back to linear, because what we want to try to avoid to do is to be always keyframing using ease in and ease out keyframes, just simply because they're so tricky to manage in the broader scheme of things. So here, what I'll actually probably do is come in and we can probably just transform this up relatively straightforwardly. So just using the regular transform tool, we can transform the whole entire shape now. Now we've got the overall changes, we can use that transform shape and maybe come in if we need to. But actually, if we have a look at the control points, they're pretty much resting where they need to be. Probably these ones here, we can push those out a little bit. I'll have to squeeze that one there. And this actually brings me to talking about the different ways of adding keyframes. Because up until now, we've really looked at following sort of the overall movements of the shapes when we've been adding keyframes. So we've been checking out where movements start and stop, or where changes happen, and adding keyframes at those particular points. But here, where we've got a movement which is a lot less predictable, we're going to be adding a lot more keyframes than previously. And one of the ways to try to avoid adding too many keyframes is to come in and basically we're going to bifurcate the keyframes that we already have here. So we've got our two keyframes here, we stick one in the middle. If it works, great. If it doesn't work, we stick another one in the middle again of these two. So let's come into our transform here, push that one down, and same here. And then see if that works. And the same over on this one. So we're going to come to the middle of these two keyframes here and just try and add as few keyframes as we possibly can in this way. So looking at the motion blur, but coming up to the hard edge, we might have to change that later. And that should ease us in a little bit. So we've created quite a lot of keyframes here, but luckily not quite one at every frame. And again, here's one where we're going to have to come in and reshape, and that's something that we're just going to have to live with when we come to hands. Is we're going to be doing a bit more reshaping than we've done previously, where we've tried to keep everything on a per shape sort of basis. But the important thing is really to try to keep the edge looking as nice as we possibly can. Cool. So let's move on now to our fingers. So let's take us to our frame 10 here, and we'll start to work on that. So now we've got our first shape going down there, and let's give this a name. Let's call this hand main. Lock that up, but not before turning motion blur on. Now we have to come to our joints here. So luckily, these are going to be relatively simple shapes. Not even relatively, these are going to be very simple shapes. We need to keep them simple, simply because there are going to be so many of them. So I'm going to come in here, add just a few control points going on down here. And this is going to be the first joint on the right hand. So let's just bring this over a little bit so we get a nice bit of overlapping. And just straighten that out a little bit. Cool. And let's give each of our fingers a lovely colour of their own. So the first finger is going to be yellow. And now it's going to be really important that we start to name everything up properly here. So let's call the shape itself, we'll call this one right hand. We'll call this bit here top finger 1, because it's the first knuckle here, or the first joint here. And let's come in and we will see what we can do with this. Now remember, again, we are looking at edges, so I'm not too concerned if these start to overlap with other bits, with other fingers, because it's going to happen. And as long as we have our edge done correctly, everything's going to be fine. So let's take us to that bit there. And we're now extending out, beyond where we've rotated the hand. So we might let's just come in and actually bring this up a little bit. Just rotate that in. And I think actually at some point, looking at this now, we have managed to slip this edge just a little bit. Not the end of the world. We are going to have another shape coming in to fill this one anyway, so we'll clean up any gaps with that later. So let's come back to our top finger. Just get that going on there. Cool. So once we've got the first joint, we then need to come and get the second joint and the third joint. And these are pretty much the same type of shapes. So keep them fairly simple. Nicely overlapping. Keep the fingers the same colour. Lock the other stuff up. Now we don't need it. Pay close attention to where things are joining here between the two shapes. We do get a nice smooth shape coming in here, because what we don't want to do is we don't want to have a very visible seam where those two shapes are meeting. And this way I can extend this one out a little bit. There we go. Cool, and we'll call this one top finger 2. And I'll quickly do the last one as well here. One quick thing to note while I'm here is this fingernail is going to be a shape of its very own as well, because it's sticking out so much, and it's in a space for itself. So we are going to have to create a new shape just for the fingernail. So that's just another little thing to watch out for, because again, we don't want to keep our shapes too complex or get our shapes too complex by adding lots of details in here, which is going to really sort of mess us up when things start to move in perspective. Let's just check this, turn my package off there. And we can start to see that working. So top finger 3. Lock all of that up, and let's just quickly, I'll quickly do the nail as well. Let's swing that back and forth just a little bit. And already here I can see, actually that's quite a useful thing to be able to see now, is we are missing a little bit of the finger down here. And I'm holding pressing Shift and A to toggle between my different overlays there. Cool, so that's looking all right. Just a tiny little patch we need to do here for the top knuckle, and then we are home free. And we'll just do the same bifurcation trick where we take one keyframe at either end and then just work our way, splitting the difference. This does tend to add, if we use this all the time, it does tend to add more keyframes than you might otherwise need to use. But in this case, there's really no good way around it. Simply because everything's changing position so much. But even when things are changing position all the time, that's when we really need to try to make our shapes or make our changes as small as possible, and keeping the whole thing consistent. So you can see here, I can see my edge is slipping out of consistency. So while that didn't seem to be a big problem at the beginning, now when everything else has come into play, we need to start to look at that a little bit closer. Cool, turn off our overlays, turn off our stabilizing. And we've now got the basis for our first hand, our first finger. Cool, so this is now becoming quite a large list of objects that we have here. Let's lift that up a little bit. So I'm going to start to try to collect these as much as I possibly can. So whenever we're finished with a shape, we try to lock it up. And now in this case, we've got 5 objects now making up this top finger. So we can just create another layer. Call this one top finger. Then take all those little shapes in there and we can close that up. Because if we don't, once we start getting all of these, we've got 5 objects here multiply that by 4 plus another couple for the thumb, we're easily going to have 20 layers working our way down here. So if we can start to tidy things up, then that's all going to work out a lot better for us. And the rest of the fingers we just do in the same sort of way. So let's take a little look, because we've just done the whole basic principles of the hand here. Let's look at it in context in this particular example. So I'm going to turn off my hand here, turn on my package front, and just actually take a look at the composite here in the view composite, because when we're let's expand this out to 50 frames again, because when we're actually doing something like a hand here, which is going to be fairly time consuming, because as you see, we have to do a lot of the frames individually. What we want to do is we want to be doing as little work as possible all the time, as little work as possible. So what we've done right now is we've actually rotoed in much more than we ever needed to, really. Let's intersect these up. Not subtract, intersect. So really all we needed to roto on this particular finger was the bottom couple of knuckles, or the top joints here. And everything else was just, unnecessary. In the context of where we are now, of course, it wasn't unnecessary, because it's interesting to see how all that stuff builds up. But in this context here, where we're trying to now save a bit of time, that's where we're gonna start to see it, is by not rotoing stuff that we don't need to. So if I'm going to come in, let's turn my package front back off again and come back to my output layer. So if we follow this up a little bit more past frame 18, and we'll take it to this frame here, which is where it starts to get a little bit more stable, or a little bit more in focus. That's frame 29. So let's just bring that in there, and let's turn our stabilize back on again, so we stabilized out that camera movement. So now we can start to move everything up together. So this is actually a kind of cool thing. It's once we've got the sort of the small movements done here, if we've got any large movements going on in the overall shape, we don't have to move everything individually. We can also keyframe the shape up, as we've done previously. So we've got, anchor point, position, scale, and rotation. Let's turn let's come in and let's come into our transform over here, come back onto our one there, and I don't want to change my anchor point. I don't want to change my anchor point too much. So when shifting my anchor point, it can be quite tricky to grab first of all. So we need to wait until it goes into the crosshairs, and we know we've got it. Yeah, so when looking for the anchor point, we want to find the sort of meaty bit where things are going to be rotating around from. It's going to be this joint here. It's going to be the wrist joint here. So now I can set keyframes on. I'm not really going to do scale, I don't think, but we'll set keyframes on position, scale, and rotation anyway. Bring that all the way up till the movement's just about finished. And let's transform this up. So let's see if we can get anywhere close to where it needs to be. Going to look mainly at this edge along here. That's cool. And let's see. That's actually helped out quite a bit. Let's carry on with that. So I can't really afford to worry too much about the individual fingers at the moment. We're trying to get the main hand movement going on. Which is pretty much there. Cool. Again, pretty much using the bifurcation trick. Taking the two keyframes and then splitting the difference and splitting the difference again and again. Okay, so now we've got the main movement going on here with the hand. We've brought up the whole finger as it was before. Just going to concentrate on the bit that's interesting to me. So I can really start to turn off shapes that aren't interesting to me at all. And that will really include most of this main hand here. So for the moment, I'm just going to turn off visibility. So I've totally made that invisible there, and I'm going to do the same for the top finger and the finger knuckle, the nail, and the other joints I do need to keep. Cool, so now we've got that main movement going on there. We can start to transform the rest of these up as well. So let's come in. And really I'm only interested in this little bit here. So let's unlock this stuff. And if I select all three of these objects here, I can transform them simultaneously. So let's just select all of them there, make sure they're all unlocked. And they are. I can nudge all of these and transform them all as a group, which is very cool. And let's come in and just individually sort out the rest. So remember, I'm really mainly interested in this area around here. Oops, don't want to do that. Got my good bit there. Got my good bit there. So halfway through, just around about there, come in and we'll do the same thing. Now the interesting thing at this point is that we can tell actually this, our top finger 2 here, is starting to move up. So it is actually changing quite significantly. So we can still transform this. So the thing is, even if moving all of these things together and doing the sort of pre-animation that we did with the main hand here, you know, even if this doesn't result in fewer keyframes down here, what it does result in is the fact we have to spend less time on actually creating those keyframes, because most of the animation is done for us, so we only have to make relatively minor movements and adjustments. And that's one of the things that's going to save, quite a significant amount of time. I'm just using the arrow keys to shift me around. Cool. So if we take a look at the overlay, the composite there, turn off our overlay. We'll check for consistency. And we're pretty much there. See, we are getting a little bit of shine through coming in here, but that's something that we can obviously change with a bit of blur right at the very end. So add a couple of 1.5 points of inner blur, not too much. And that combined with the motion blur should give us the result that we need. Cool, so that is one of the approaches that we can make towards hands. So we came in, we looked for various tracking points that we could do to help us out. We took in, one of the arm tracks here, which was actually tracking the arm itself, or the other track that we did use was just to neutralize out the camera movement. We then went in, we started to identify the edges of the hand and then build up the individual joints of the fingers. So when we've got something like this particular hand here where everything is moving a whole load and there's a load of perspective shifts going on with the fingers as they roll around and turn around, it's absolutely crucial that we try and keep these shapes as simple as possible. And, when we start to build up all of the fingers, it's also, again, vital that we start to group these into individual layers for themselves. So when it comes to it, and we've got our full roto sorted out here, I could easily see, okay, what's my my right hand doing? Okay, that's the right hand. So let's build up at the top finger, the index finger, middle finger, ring finger, little finger. It's we can easily check out all of these areas individually very, very quickly. And I'm not sure why my hand main is in there when it should actually be grouped in there instead. Cool. But then the basic method of animating this, because it's moving so quickly, we've had to use a slightly different way of keyframing than we have done previously. So instead of looking solely for points of animation, we've had to go in, find the animation points, say at frame say 10 and 18, and then go in and split those up into two. So we found the middle point between those two frames, add a keyframe there, and then if that's still not right, then we sort of add a keyframe in the middle of that there. So we're basically splitting the difference until we end up with the result that we actually want. And when it comes to big movements, remember that animating the overall shape here can actually save you a whole load of time as well. It might not save you keyframes. We've still got a whole load of keyframes going on down here, but you can find that the distances that we have to move those when we come to make the smaller adjustments are actually much smaller and faster than they otherwise would be if we had to adjust, let's say all 5 shapes here from the bottom of the screen up to the top of the screen. Far easier to animate the one group and then do the small changes on the 5 there. And probably the most important lesson, and one that we purposely didn't follow today, is just roto what you need. You know, we don't need the hand over here if all we're trying to do is get the intersecting bit between the box here and the fingers themselves. So it's cool that we carry on the shape a little bit past where we otherwise would need to go, but obviously, you know, if we don't need to roto the full hand here, then we're not going to roto the full hand. Great, well I hope that's been useful. If you do have questions, then obviously come and post them on the forums. I really do enjoy reading and answering those for you. So for another week, my name's Ben Brownlee. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you again soon.